All right, we're all set.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I am thrilled to be here with you this afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lynn Braun. I'm the Director of Counseling Services here at SUNY Oswego, almost a year in just a couple weeks. So those of you I haven't gotten to meet yet, hopefully today we'll get to know each other a little better. I'm hoping this is as informal as we can have it be over Zoom, even though I know that's a little more difficult than we're all sitting in the same spot, but we'll try today. And want part of this for sure to be a discussion too, as much as we can. And I have a presentation I can pop up every now and then as we get going as well. But really just wanted, I think the title of this is Managing Student Distress, and just wanted to start by giving folks a chance to share what they're hoping. So this will be a success for you if you walk away having talked about what specifically. I kind of want to get a sense of what everybody is looking for today, or as they come into this. So if there's something in particular, if somebody wants to either unmute or pop something in the chat, I think either way we can probably make that work. I would appreciate it as we get rolling here. Okay. Are there things in particular that made you want to come to this today, managing student distress?
We have a couple in the chat.
Yep.
Peter mentioned hoping to hear about and learn from others' experiences. Nothing specific, but increased student anxiety and stress. Learning about strategies to identify and support students.
Yep. Okay, I see all of those. And I hope that we get to all of them. If something happens in the end and we haven't, then we'll come back to it and circle back. But I think everything there is what I was already hoping to talk to everybody about today. To Jen, I think to your point, in the chat, there is no question that anxiety and stress has increased in this kind of post-COVID era. It's interesting when you look at the mental health data on students and the problems they present with, at least in the college counseling world, for years, depression and anxiety kind of went back and forth, in the number one and number two spot of what is the presenting problem the students come with the most. And it was last year, for the first time ever, that we had a new number one, which became social anxiety. And social anxiety has risen to the top, and it has now stayed at the top. I think it's going to be number one again this year. When you look at the data that comes out of the Center for Collegiate Mental Health out of Penn State, which many centers across the country contribute data to, including ours. We're finding a parallel situation here, specifically at SUNY Oswego, that we're seeing nationally in terms of that data. And what's really interesting when you really drill down on that data and look at what factors go into social anxiety, the number one predominant factor, and the one that's actually even increased the most in the last few years, is being worried about what people think about me. So it's actually not the isolation piece, it's the being worried about, to me, it's kind of this cancel culture piece, right? It's this, what's going to happen? What are people going to think about me, and what's going to happen? And so we absolutely have seen an increase. I think that we're not just seeing an increase in student population, by the way, we're seeing an increase everywhere. I think that that as faculty and staff, we're feeling some of those same things as well. So I don't think any of that is a surprise or a shock. And so when we go to, as I was thinking about this today, it really had me starting to think about what concerns us most. So when we're going to talk a little bit about what's the difference between distressed and disturbed folks, and then what's the difference. But when you think about dealing with concerns that your students are having, what comes to your mind as being the most concerning about that? What is it about that that has you feeling, the feeling like that that we're going to struggle managing this with students? What is it about it that we find stressful? Anybody have a thought they'd like to share? Wanting to be as helpful as you can. Absolutely. Feel free to unmute too and join the conversation if you'd like. You don't have to, but feel free.
So I teach dance, and it's a beginner class, and a lot of people I have never danced a day in their life, and then I have a few that have been dancers since they were 3 years old. And the ones that have never danced always feel like they have to look like the ones that have been dancing their whole life, and they're not going to get a good grade. So that was something this past semester I worked really hard to create, like, a culture within the classroom that your best is, or your perfect is your best, and trying to, like, encourage them that you don't have to look like anyone else. So kind of going back to, like, what you were talking about with, like, the cancel culture and, like, what are people going to think of me in this class? And so just trying to, like, get the same, like, learning for everyone within the class at different levels, but making sure everyone feels comfortable, and always having that in the back of my mind is always something that I get stressed about going into class. Like, always
Sure.
everyone going to feel comfortable in here, and trying to make that environment.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. Anybody else? What concerns you the most when you think about dealing with students in distress?
Hi, sorry I was late.
It's okay.
I think, and if I break up, I'm sorry, home, um, my home internet is spotty at best, so I'll apologize ahead of time. I find the hardest thing in these situations I see is if they're in distress in front of their peers, is be able to assist them without separating them to make them feel there's more of a spotlight on them. And then taking them aside and saying, we'll talk as soon as we can. Just go take a drink, go get them out at their own comfort level so they don't feel they're singled out.
Sure.
Because of what I teach, that's very hard to do because it's all about the drama in the department. And the kids are so close because they spend a great deal of hours in each other's lives, literally. And that's alone very overwhelming for our, especially our freshmen, in our transfers.
Sure.
So
no, I bet that's true. Thank you for that. So if we shift gears to start to talk about disruptive and students creating disturbance, if you had to think about the difference in those, or what is disruptive behavior? And I'm going to pop my screen in because I'm going to share some things here along the way that might then be helpful. And hopefully everybody can see that. What do you think about when you think about what's behavior that's disruptive?
hi
Anybody
everyone.
have a
I'm gonna
thought? Hi, Abby.
Hi, I'm Abby from SUNY Delhi. Thank you for inviting outside people. I'm going to be in and out a little bit, so I look forward to the recording, but I've noticed an increase in lack of social skills. So, or noticeable pauses or breaks. And again, I'm old, so I think of just old school manners, etc. But I'm pretty lenient and patient with students, but I had several this semester that I could be midstream in a lesson or a discussion, either to the whole group or to someone else. And that student literally demands my attention right then. Not even in a rude way, but just thinks that, yep, I can just jump in now. And then I've had that same student almost walk into my office with the door closed, and I'm obviously talking to someone else. Left class early after they did their presentation and things of that nature, which I felt were very strange. And we try to address some of those things in the beginning of the course and reiterate some of those basic courtesies, etc. But I found that to be very interesting and seeing that increasing a little bit.
Thanks for that. Other thoughts? It's definitely an example of disruptive behavior for sure. What does it mean for them to be disruptive?
I'm gonna
Go
say
ahead.
things that take attention away from the goal, but then in my brain is like, but you know, the shared goal, I guess, is kind of what I mean. Yes, the faculty might have a goal, but the students may have different goals. I think in my classrooms, a big one is not coming, which I know we may think of the barrier as like, oh, you stopped what was happening with the group, but it's a big deal to me, like when they don't come, or when they don't respond to when I reach out and say, hey, is everything all right? Haven't seen you. It definitely disrupts their own interaction then with the material and their own learning. But the other peers see it. And as much as I'm trying to say it's a big deal and we want you here, that's all an email with me and the student. They don't know. And so sometimes I worry that it disrupts other student behavior and their learning, other student learning, in the sense of, oh, it's not a big deal if I don't miss. Or if I miss, excuse me, like Miss Daniels don't really do anything about it.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that we'll talk later, especially when we get to talking more about distress. You know, once a student has missed, there's often this anxious avoidant piece really that happens too, right? That maybe we'll have a few minutes to talk about how to help manage. But if we look really at just the behavior of disruption, it's really simple, right? It's behavior that interferes with other people's ability to live and learn, right? I mean, so and that definition doesn't change when I do trainings with RAs or anybody else on campus. To me, this is the factor, right? Is what a student's doing interfering with other people's ability to learn? As Abby was just talking about a couple minutes ago, clearly, right? If I'm interrupting class or inserting myself in ways that are interfering with people's ability to learn, I'm becoming to some degree disruptive, right? So it happens in little ways like that. It also happens in big ways as people get really upset or agitated, right? Or who sometimes are yelling or screaming or posturing or other things. Abby put some things in the chat there too, I think that are relevant. So there are lots of things that could be, right, that could cause a disruption in this place. Don't know if everybody here is faculty or is teaching, but if we're going to talk about that specifically, right, that's going to interfere with our classroom environment, right, or whatever it is that we're doing. And so that's disruption. And that happens for sure. But the other piece is, what's it mean to have distressed students? And a lot of what folks commented on at the beginning, it really has more to do with distress, right, than even disruption. What's happening with students? And so if we were to think about distress in particular, how do we start to know if somebody is distressed? Clearly, if they're creating a disruption, they may be, but you don't have to be distressed to be disruptive necessarily. Some people just are trying to be dumb and funny, and causing disruption. I mean, you can cause a disruption in lots of different ways. And not all distressed people are disruptive even, really. So there's some overlap here and sometimes there isn't. But if I'm looking to identify, how do I know if somebody is distressed? What are some thoughts that you have for how we start to sort that out? What's it look like?
I think that all of us who observe our students, it's like you can even tell when it's a brand new student. First week, you start watching physicalities. I know there's those who have huge lecture classes. I'm very lucky. I have small classes, small groups. Just observing a person, certain habits give it away, certain postures where they sit. Are they looking down? Are they looking up? I think just by observing students can let us know there may be something not really wrong, but something's off. Could be a first sign of
Okay.
distress.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think there's some good descriptors there that you mentioned. Part of it when I look at it is some things. I think often we think of distress, right, as the student who is visibly stressed or crying. Jen, you wrote in the comments, overwhelmed and flustered. Sometimes they are telling you pretty directly, right, when they talk to you that they're overwhelmed. They come in upset about something else. And I think those are yep, absolutely. Right. Changing seats, changes in attendance. So there we get to the other piece. So there's this kind of visible distressed part, right, that we can identify that contributes to us understanding somebody's distress. And then there are behavioral things that are what I would maybe call more subtle, that are signs of distress. And I kind of heading more kind of into this area, Abby, that you're heading in, which is changes in attendance, some body language, sometimes being too quiet, right? Those aren't the normal visible signs of stress. But, when we look at this list that I'm going to pop up on the screen here in a second, a lot of what you'll see is in some ways, distress is almost anything if it's not typical for somebody, which can then get really hard, right? To identify. So if you can look at the list here I popped on the screen, sometimes it's being withdrawn, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's actually being a little more erratic or outgoing if it's not normal for them. Sometimes it is looking really fatigued. Clearly sometimes it's that regular kinds of things that we're used to, the anxious, upset, tearful, but sometimes it's just a lack of motivation, right? And concentration. That's a lot more subtle than me looking visibly distressed. And so, as Judy was speaking about a second ago, some of these are a lot harder to identify if you're in a big classroom, right? Versus if you're in smaller ones. Some of them are a lot harder to identify if this is early in the semester, I'm just getting to know you, versus later in the semester, and and I start to understand kind of who you are and how you operate. So the subtle pieces of this I think are harder sometimes to get. And my general rule of thumb is, it is, in my experience, extremely rare that students just miss class because they're lazy, or because every now and then you get them. But most of the time, at least the students that I have had experience working with, most of them have other factors that are impacting their functioning, that are impacting their ability to attend class and participate. most of them are not wanting to fail. That doesn't mean that they understand what it means to succeed, or it doesn't mean that they've decided that they're willing to do all those things, right? I mean, there are lots of, you look at change and what it means to work and produce, they're not always completely engaged in that process, but most of them, you don't come to college wanting to fail. At least almost nobody does, I'll say it that way. But I look at how everything is symptom then, right? Is kind of the way I look at it. So if they're not coming to class, that is almost always symptom of something. Now that doesn't mean, as like Natasha, you were saying, that doesn't mean that if I'm the one that reaches out, they're going to respond to me. Doesn't always mean that, unfortunately. And it's why we'll talk at the end. It's why we have some systems in place and some networks in place to try to catch some of those folks even. Because they may be more reluctant to reach out to somebody in particular. Sometimes, especially faculty, especially if they're insecure from a learning standpoint, then they're worried about that judgment or what's going to get said about them. Some of them have had an experience, right, in secondary school of getting humiliated in classes and having other things happen. So we never kind of know what their background is, unfortunately, to know what's contributing to them not responding in those moments when we're trying to be caring. And so part of what we'll talk about toward the end is what do we have in place on campus so that if I am trying to reach out to a student and they're not responding to me, that maybe somebody else can help, right? Do some reach out and try to make some intervention. Because this inability to tolerate distress and work through distress, right, is an extremely high risk factor from a retention management standpoint and their own success. Because if they can't figure out ways of working through those issues, they're not going to make it. Which creates an additional layer of distress in the end, right? Because now they're also unsuccessful on top of that, which is one of the biggest things we're trying to prevent. Questions or anything about this list? I mean, this is not exhaustive, clearly, right? But this is kind of just a general, kind of nuts and bolts, some things to think about. I'm going to pop up some work from Marshall Linehan, actually, in this concept of wise mind. I think when we're dealing with both distressed and disruptive students, often it's important to remember what state they're in, and to realize that most of us, when we're distressed, are using primarily what Linehan would call our emotional self, which means what we're generally focused on is what it feels like. And our logic center, right, what the truth is, what's real, is often not easily accessible. And the more distressed I get, the harder that is to access. And, our thinking self doesn't care at all about what it feels like. It just cares about what truth and reality are. And so when we're in a distressed state, it's very hard to be what we ideally want to be, which is in the middle, right? Where I'm paying attention to how I feel and I'm working that through what I know to decide is it making sense, right? And our thinking self becomes, I almost think of it as the volume control really for the emotional self, right? So it's part of what tells our emotional self if we dialed it in right. Are we worrying too much about this given all the facts of it, right? Or is this something I need to worry about at all? But I put this up here to help us remember that almost always when I'm dealing with somebody who is upset in any form, it's all emotional self. Almost always, which means our ability sometimes to try to get them to problem solve doesn't work well because they're not in a place to think yet, if that makes sense. Because they're often in a highly distressed state. And so as we go on later and talk about how do we help in those moments, this becomes important to think about because we have to get to a place where they can activate that processing center and decrease the intensity of that emotional center so that they can start to think a little more, right? And problem solve and process. Feel free if you have questions along the way to ask them or to pop them in the chat, what have you. But does that make sense so far, kind of as we head through? Okay. I popped this screen in because I think that it's super important as any of us think about how to help anybody else. We also have to know ourselves well enough to know not what we can and can't manage, because I actually think most of us can handle most things, but it's important to understand things like this. What are the things that are most likely to cause us to be anxious, afraid, angry? I really like this one. What do you find the most annoying? Those are important things to self-check, right? As we talk about, trying to help students or help anybody around us, right, who's not doing well. Because often they are communicating their distress, right, or their disruption in ways that cause one of those four feelings or multiples to happen. And that's a very just human thing. Sometimes we're just worried about them too, but often, people are doing things that are really causing us to get frustrated, annoyed, sometimes a little anxious because it feels like it's maybe not something we're sure we can manage. Sometimes it's afraid because, we're just worried for them. But really understanding where we each are with what those things are, because if I were to survey everybody sitting here in the room right now, everybody has different things that cause those, right? So, we each have a capacity to manage different things at different levels, and really knowing yourself well enough to know where and what those are, I think is really important, because that also then helps you identify what are the things that are going to be the hardest. And it doesn't mean I can always avoid them, but it may mean the things I get a little more consultation about, right? Or that I make some plans for. And that to me is the big factor. I'm a therapist and there are things that annoy me. And this is what I'm supposed to do for a living. I don't, but so what I do, right, to manage that and to deal with that is you plan for that, right? So when that thing happens, I have a plan in my head that I work through so that annoyance doesn't come out at them, right? So that I remember what this is, so that I can respond in a really appropriate way to that situation and not have that button get pushed for me, if that makes sense, right? And so as you think about what those things are on your list, those are your tips for what to make plans for, right? Because if I can plan for how to manage that, then I'm way more likely to behave appropriately and helpfully, even for the things that push my buttons. And so that's just some things to think about. And the last piece on this page is really, how is somebody going to know if you're struggling? So hopefully you have peers who you feel close enough to in your department or otherwise, who you have to consult with and to find supportive. You can absolutely, to whatever degree you're comfortable, add me to a list like that, and feel free to consult with me at any point as well. But how is somebody around you going to know if you're not doing okay? Because that's actually an important factor in this too, because it's one thing to manage all the issues we're managing in your classrooms and on campus, but are we going to be paying enough attention to ourselves and our colleagues around us that we're going to help be able to identify what's going on with them and when they're in trouble? This is one of the questions that when I work with hall directors who end up working very closely together, we talk a lot about. So in the higher the pressure situations and the higher the pressure your job is, the more important is that it is for you to know that there are some people around you who will know what to identify, because we're not always good at knowing, right, when we're in trouble, when it starts. Sometimes we just kind of get blinders on and we kind of just try to hyper focus and work through. So being able to really have some people around who are going to know that, both at work and at home or outside of work, is really important to remember. I like this. My father didn't say it quite this way, but his general, I think, kind of philosophy of life is most people are doing the best they can with what they have. It's something I try to remember. We all just don't have the same stuff or the same amounts or the same capacity all the time. And I think that it's important because I don't think, at least in my experience, again, as I said earlier, that most students are just trying, right, to fail or to not do well, or to, most people want to do well. I think that we do, though, have a good chunk of students who who aren't really sure that they're even capable. And so they have a lot of insecurities, right, and other things that sometimes then interfere with their functioning and their ability to engage. And, I think that giving folks a little benefit of the doubt at times is helpful early on in this process, and not always assuming the worst of them. I use this with students all the time. Actually, I use it with my staff all the time too, recognizing that both for us and for them, right, whatever our best is not the same every day. And doing our best is all we really have. But, my capacity day to day really varies based on lots of factors, and their capacity changes based on lots of factors. And so finding a way to kind of give us all a little grace in that, I think, can be really helpful. Yet still we have standards, right, that we have to have students meet as part of course requirements, right, and all those things. That doesn't mean they don't have to meet them. It just means that we understand that sometimes you're going to have an off day, right? Or sometimes your capacity is not going to be quite what it is other days. And, we then have to get concerned if it looks like somebody isn't capable, right, of giving you of achieving those objectives, right, that come into that learning environment, or what they have going on outside of the classroom is creating too much of a disturbance on what they're trying to do inside the classroom, which is why some of our students need to withdraw or to shorten their course loads or other things. Here's the last image that I'll show you before we go on and talk about strategies. Again, just as important for us as it is, I think, for our students, but, part of my work is helping people to do better at this, because most people who are struggling are often trying to control everything they can't and not what they can, if that makes sense. And so I like this image a lot. And so I think it's good for us too, even when we're focusing with students who are really distressed or that we're stressed at figuring out how to manage, remembering the things I actually can do something about, which, yes, is all us, is super helpful. And really remembering too that our job is not to solve all those other problems. That's where we're heading, and we're going to talk more about that. But, I can control whether I get frustrated with them or show them that I am, right? I can control how I communicate with them. I may not be able to solve their problem completely, or at all, depending on what it is. And that's, I think this is a critical thing to remember anytime we're trying to reduce our own internal stress. It's also a happiness key too, right? The more we can recognize what we can control and what we can't, and focus our energy inside the circle, generally the happier people are, and the more capable they feel at being able to manage things, right? So this is a reminder, I guess, on lots of levels. Okay, so what do we do now, right? If we are encountering folks who are distressed. So just some strategies. This is a little acronym that the Residence Life folks have really liked, so I thought I'd include it here. You'll get the general concepts whether you ever remember what BLABIT means or not, but they tend to like it, and so I tend to use it. But the first one really is just breathing, is really remembering that giving yourself some space to stop and think and just be centered and kind of present and not panicking, right? At the first part of that becomes really important. That's what helps, back to our Linehan diagram earlier about wise mind. Just stopping to take that breath is what keeps us out of only being an emotional mind too, right? Because that is not helpful. If I've got a student who's super distressed and mostly factoring from their emotional self, I need to try to be more in my wise mind, right? To be able to help that. If we're both in emotional mind, it is not going to work as well, right? In terms of reducing distress. So that breath becomes really important. The L is for listen, supportively and empathetically. The whys don't really matter, right? So just trying to understand what's happening for that person. When we get the opportunity to have a conversation with them, and when it's appropriate for it, right? Because part of the problem is they sometimes want to have conversations at times that are not quite as appropriate, let's be honest. And so finding ways of pausing them or pulling them aside. I know Judy was talking about how that's hard sometimes, finding ways of finding the right moments to do these to have these conversations also becomes important here too. The A is for affirm. Affirm, validate, and normalize. That does not mean agree with. Let's be clear, right? There's nothing about de-escalation that means we have to agree. It may mean, though, that we don't actively disagree. That's probably true, but I don't have to completely agree. But I can generally act in a way that believes that their experience is what their experience is, if that makes sense. So at the point at which they're in an emotional mind, it doesn't do me a lot of good to try to convince them why the way they feel like reality isn't that. I'm way better off, right? Just trying to calm them down to a point where they can think again, and then have us talk through what options are, or maybe then is an opportunity to talk about to bring some reality in, right? So that they can maybe look at this through a different lens. But as long as I'm in mostly an emotional state, I'm not going to be able to process that. And so my role, or your role, or any of our roles in those moments is just to be supportive and empathetic and to just affirm those experiences. And so I'll often say, I'm really sorry that that's what you feel like's happening to you. That doesn't mean I'm agreeing it's happening. I don't know for sure, but I'm sure sorry it feels like it's happening. And that can seem like a splitting of hairs, but I don't really think it is, because I actually am sorry. I don't want them to feel like that's what's happening, but I don't know for sure if it is or isn't, right? Because I often, especially in my line of work, but often even in yours, I'm walking into the middle of a moment, right? I don't have all the truth and fact. And in this moment, it doesn't actually matter. Well, all that matters in this moment is I can believe their point of view in this point in time, as a way of trying to de-escalate it, which is why we go to that B, which is believe them. Again, that's not about truth. It is about believing that their experience is what it is. That doesn't mean that they're completely right or that whoever else it is completely wrong. It's not even agreeing to what specifically happened, but it is believing that their perception is what their perception is. Because I don't have to be disagreeable about that in that moment. And there'll be a time for that if it's necessary once we're past a crisis moment or past or more de-escalated. I then becomes information, right? If it's your role, part of sometimes then we can create a supportive environment. Let's just gather information. Often that's important in our roles, because if I can understand what's happening, I can help figure out, right, what the right office is or how to help solve that problem if it's on campus or what have you. But also remember, our job is not to investigate or know it all either. I don't think any of us have to feel that pressure. And so this is one of those that I want to create a supportive environment. If it's appropriate for me to gather some information, great. But there are many moments that we don't need to worry about being the information gatherer. I used to train at my previous institution. I led all the educational efforts around Title IX, and would really often say, yes, your job is to create a supportive environment. You don't have to investigate that, right? You don't have to ask all the questions that a Title IX investigator would ask, or call in all the details. You just need to hear what they want to say to you, right? If you want to ask a couple clarifiers, that's fine, but it's not your job to investigate. And I think it's true in lots of ways. There are times it's helpful for us, though, to ask clarifying questions to help find a solution, right? And so helping make sure that we're all clear on the difference between those two things as we're moving forward and helping folks. T is really just being trauma informed. So are we really working from a trauma informed standpoint? And in a large part, that really comes from, are we realizing that most of the time, in most settings, when there are more than 3 or 4 people in the room, trauma is present more than likely in some setting. So are we being conscious about that? Are we being sensitive to that in how we speak? And are we then prepared, if we're told about something that falls into into a trauma realm, that we know how to make appropriate referrals and do all of those things? If you join us in a couple sessions, I think I'm doing a session on the impact of trauma and bias incidents on learning and mental health, and we'll talk a little more about the impact of trauma in that workshop. But I think this is a really good framework for just how do you stay calm and just listen to a person. It is not our job to solve their problem most of the time. Sometimes it's in our role and we know some facts and some things that we can send them to the right resource, or we can give them some general advice. But I think we have to be very careful in becoming the advice giver, if that makes sense. Does anybody have a guess why I say that? Why is it not good to end up the advice giver most of the time?
I would say for me, I just concerned about going beyond my role as a faculty member. Like I feel like are certain limits on what I should be getting involved in my students' lives.
That's part of it, sure, right? I think, yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. I think the other part of it really is, whose idea is this? And if it doesn't work, who do I want them focusing on? Right? It's like a new therapist 101 course, right? Of not telling your clients what to do. First of all, I don't know how we can, right? Because I don't know how we can think we know what everybody should do. And I think that's true for all of us, but we only know our perspective, right, of the world in those ways. But the other piece of it is, it's not actually helpful for somebody to have any agency, right, for themselves. And so, I really think of it this way. I work real hard to not suggest what people do. I do work hard at making sure they know what all their options are and what all the consequences of those things may be, right? So even when I was a faculty member, I'm not going to tell a student they should withdraw from a class. I am going to talk about, here's what's happening and here are your options and here's what's going to happen, right, based on those. And here are some things you might want to think through as you're making decisions, right, about what to do about those. Or if you want help talking through those questions, I'm happy to talk through those with you. But in the end, you're going to have to figure out which of these makes the most sense for you. And I think that's a good framework for almost everything, right? So I can delve into areas that aren't necessarily my lane if I'm real clear that I am not in any way suggesting things, right, to folks that they do. Can most of us help people think about what their options are in certain moments? Most of us probably can. Can most of us help a person think through what consequences would be of something? Most of us probably can. And I think that that's the other thing that I want us all to remember is, we all every day deal with people in our lives who are distressed at home or somewhere, or at least once a week, probably. And we all manage those moments, right? We've all had people in our lives who are upset about something and we help calm them down and figure out how to move forward. If you can do that in those venues, you can do that in this one. We have probably all at some point dealt with somebody who was really disruptive outside of work. Somehow we probably managed that moment. So it's part of it is remembering we all have skills that we bring into this that we actually have used before that you can use here. And part of it is remembering that you have them. And then I think it's creating kind of what are the guardrails of that, right? Of how I use them so that I don't worry about overstepping role, right? I mean, Peter, that's kind of what you were talking about. And I think that that's really where thinking about, my role being more helping you understand what your options are. And if I'm not sure what they are, then I know the resource, right, that can help you think about what your options are. But even then, you're going to have to make the choice to go access that, even though, or do you want me to make the call to help link you to that? Or do you want me to walk you there, right? There are lots of ways we can be helpful in linking somebody to resources that isn't picking for them, right? Or that isn't making a choice for somebody. And so I can be supportive in many alliterations there and it can look at like a lot of different things. Does that make sense? Okay, so once folks are calm, then you can move forward to problem solving, right? And again, it's not always here's a solution, but how do you think about that? So anytime you're dealing with distress, we have to de-escalate and then work on moving forward and trying to solve. And I think that what a mistake a lot of people make is they try to solve before folks are calm enough to think. And so that's why I stick that there. It's just something to think about. So if that's distress, what do we do with disruption? And these are just some thoughts that I threw up on the screen, some de-escalation tips. Very similar, by the way. You're going to see a lot of similarities between disruption and distress, again, because there's some overlap there, right? In the emotionality and that piece. We get down to the end of it. I think that's it. We're going to try to stay empathetic and non-judgmental, even if we know they're wrong, right? Like, again, this is not the moment to be right. This is just the moment to calm. And part of it is understanding what the goal is of these moments. There's a time to be right later, and I'm sure it will come, but it's not that moment generally. And so being really respectful of personal space, being really aware, right, of who's around, not getting too far away that you look afraid of them, right, but not getting too close if they're really agitated and disruptive. Really making sure you're keeping pretty open posture, right, and non-threatening posture. So if they're sitting, don't stand. Like trying to not completely mimic, because if they're really agitated, I may purposely slow down a little more, right? I'm gonna try to model whatever the posture is I'm hoping that they're gonna get into to some degree. But just giving some thought to that in the moment. Remembering that emotional brain piece, right? Trying not to get that too activated in a moment. I don't think it's quite here, but I just try not to take anything too personally in that moment, right? Because if a person is super agitated and disruptive, this is just emotional self doing its thing, right? Truth doesn't even matter in those moments. I don't know about you, but at times I get my most emotionally distressed. Or if I look at folks I've seen who get disruptive in those moments, they're not thinking about right? Sometimes they're just trying to cause disturbance. And so it's just not taking anything of what they say if they try to verbally attack us too personally. It says here, to focus on feelings, what's the real message? I think the point of that really is remembering that most people who are angry are not always angry. I mean, they are, but there are often other things happening. Often they're scared, often they're sad, often they're worried. I've seen a lot of students get really agitated, angry, when in the end what they really are is scared because they think they're flunking out and they don't know what to do. So kind of, am I listening for what's happening maybe behind the scene there, right? And at least having some awareness that there may be something else happening beyond what I can see in a moment. Try to not challenge them from kind of an authority standpoint. Generally not helpful if they're really agitated, right? Our job is to help just de-escalate that in a moment. And so I'll have folks, say like, so you think you can tell me what to do, right? Or things like that, or trying to, or thinking that, you're kind of trying to, quote unquote, throw your weight around, right, in some way from your role. And it's just super important to not do that in those moments, right? That's not the point at this point in it. It's really just to try to help hear them and calm them down. Reasonable limits. There are boundaries to what they're going to be allowed to do before we have to do something. So if I've got somebody who's getting super agitated and they're not quitting, there are going to be moments that I have to help them understand they have some options. That, I understand you're super upset. If you continue to yell and scream like this, you need to understand somebody is going to hear that and other people are going to be coming, right? Because you can't continue to say these kinds of things here and people not take that as a threat. And so I need you to think about that before you continue. I'm going to give people their choices. I'm not just going to say you have to quit saying that, right? Because that's a challenge that I can't actually make them do anyway. But I do want them to understand what will happen if they keep doing certain things, right? I do put some guardrail up that I'm willing to follow through on if they don't calm down, right? Or, it could be just somebody being disruptive in class. you continue to do that, you're going. You're not staying here, right? Because it's not appropriate for this moment. And that could be them being agitated. That could also just be them acting a fool in some way and thinking they're funny. There are lots of ways that we have to stop somebody and say, nope, that's not okay here. And so you either need to get in a different space or you need to go for now, because that is not what we're going to do in this moment. And I'll be happy to talk to you about it later, right? Things like that. How do we help preserve the learning environment anytime we can? But at times also set limits. And I think what's important is when you've got somebody disruptive in your class, that also sets the right tone for our students. It lets them know that they have somebody who is going to help them, right? Who's going to help manage one of those moments. It's our job to manage it. We're the professor, right? We're in charge of the classroom, so that they then trust that there's somebody that's going to, number one, manage it. Number two, they don't have to feel unsafe, right? Because we're going to make sure that no one is allowed to stay in this environment if they're being in this certain way. And if they see us handling that in compassionate but firm ways, then that helps the whole classroom honestly understand how to respond to it as well. And I think that that's really helpful. Don't be afraid of just being quiet for a little bit and letting them rant a little and letting them just kind of get it out. Sometimes people just need to vent it, as long as it's an appropriate moment to do it. And often once they do, they actually de-escalate fairly quickly. But the more questions I ask, often the more agitated they'll get. And so, because they have to keep talking about it and they keep spinning around in their head. So often, if I just let them really go, if they start to calm down, then sometimes it's my moment to even ask, what are they looking for, right, from you in a moment? Are they looking for advice and help, right? Are they looking, or do they just need somebody to vent to because you're the one they bumped into, right, after this thing happened? And so how we encounter them varies. But hopefully as they de-escalate, we then get some time to help make some decisions if they need to, which is the last bullet point there. Questions about any of that? Okay. This next slide are just important things to remember in terms of dealing with folks who are really hyper agitated. And that really just is, right, the less controlling and confrontational we try to be, the more control we get in these moments, because we are not in a power struggle then with them. Arguing facts makes it worse, generally really quickly. So it's why kind of truth doesn't always matter in those kinds of moments. De-escalation is kind of all that matters. Now, but I'm not going to just agree with them, if that makes sense. So I'm not going to lie to them, because later then if I change my tune, right, then that's going to create an escalation. I will believe how that they are seeing it the way they are, but I'm not going to argue that that's not reality, but I'm also not going to agree that it's reality, however they're seeing it, so that I don't end up in a bind later, if that makes some sense. Trying to focus on the present as much as we can, trying not to take it personally. It's also really important there at the bottom is really think about basic needs. So if I've got somebody super upset and distressed, are they hungry? Do they need a drink? Have they had any sleep? It's crazy how offering somebody a snack or water can de-escalate a moment. Sometimes just that pulls them right out of it. And often what you found is they haven't eaten or drank, and so we have some physiological stuff happening often that's contributing. I don't know, I've got some folks in my house that get downright hangry, I guess is the new term. I never really knew that term until but I've got a few people in my house now who absolutely get that way, and partly from just how they're reacting, that this is not about anger, this is about they need a snack. And so kind of remembering that same thing. So I'll let somebody rant for a while, and again, it also comes off as super caring, which we tend to be, right? Is there anything I can get you to drink? Is there anything that would help? Have you had something to eat? I always keep snacks in my drawer as a as a little fail safe every now and then in case I need to pull something out for somebody who's really struggling. So that just a couple things to note there to remember. Okay. I always like to put this quote up. I use this a lot with Residence Life and for those folks, those are students who have multiple roles, right? And they've got to kind of try to manage that. I think for us as faculty and staff, it's slightly different, but I think really relevant, right? That what we're really doing is controlling us as a way and making sure that we're acting the way we want to act, and that will in turn, right, help the other person. And it's not really about controlling them per se. And that's a much more powerful kind of stance to take, I think, and makes us feel a lot better as we come at it. Questions or thoughts or anything about any of those things? Okay. I'm gonna pull off the share because we're gonna talk about some other kind of strategies and resources on campus. A couple things just to note, right? I mean, clearly, if you have a student who is distressed and they are not calming, and everybody and either you are feeling nervous or other people are feeling nervous, then clearly you always have university police to call for support, right? If you feel like physically they're going to get threatening or out of control. I have found that most of the time, in my experience, it's not necessary. Usually, if I use some of those strategies, they de-escalate. But occasionally we need to do it. And so knowing that that's your resource is absolutely important. I think the couple other resources in general that I want you to know, and that as the dean of students and I talk on a regular basis about these kinds of issues that she and I really agree on is, there's and I'm gonna forget it now, the exact play. There are many ways you can let us know if you're concerned about a student. Whether they've been disruptive in your class or whether you just think they're in distress, right, in some way. And so if you want to consult about a student that you're worried about and you're not sure what to do, you can always reach out to me directly or to the center directly and talk to the person on call. You can feel free to ask for me. You can pop me an email if you want, if it's not urgent, and we can set up a time to talk, or you can always call and talk to the front desk, and Patty will, if I'm not free, make sure to find a time that I am. Always happy to consult with you at any point. I think that it's one of the key factors of our role is to help make sure the campus community has the support they need to help support students. And so if you have a student you're really worried about and you've had several reach outs or conversations and you're not quite sure what to do, don't ever hesitate to reach out. I would say the same for the Dean of Students office. If you have especially students who are having resource problems, then we have a lot of students who have a lot of insecurities, right? Food insecurity, home, housing insecurity, who need some community resources. Dean of Students office has a whole wing now that helps with that. They do that some in conjunction with my office and our case manager as well, who helps with that to some degree, but most of that's happening out of the Dean of Students office. We also have a BIT team, which hopefully everybody's familiar with, a behavior intervention team that is definitely set up to work with at-risk folks. But we also have kind of a subset of that I would almost call more of a care team, though we don't have an official name for it, that is really designed to look at what are students who are in trouble, right, or at risk. So if you have that student who has missed class a whole bunch of times and who's not responding to you, you can put a concern in to the system, and that's going to come to the Dean of Students and myself and my case manager and a couple people in her office, and the 4 or 5 of us then pull those together and look and see what else we know about them, right? Sometimes we are having housing do a little check-in over there if they live on campus, or one of us for some reason has had a connection with them and we have a little more information that we can provide to a moment. Sometimes your piece of information is kind of the last straw in a 3 or 4 pieces of information we have to say, oh no, we need to be a little more assertive in our intervention, right, and trying to get them to make contact with us. And so if you have, I think the biggest thing I'd like you to know beyond, here's some ways to help students, is if you're concerned about a student that you either aren't getting a response from, or even when you are, it's not getting better, don't hesitate to put a concern through. And I think that happens for you all through a different system than mine. Oh, and it just left my head. A starfish, I think, is maybe where you put it through, I want to say. Also the Dean of Students page, I know that they list the spot. There is a place there, I think, that links you to the right site to submit a student concern to. But here's what I'm going to tell you. If in doubt, just pop us both an email. Right? If you're not sure how to where to put the concern through, then if you put the Dean of Students and I on an email, then they don't fall through, because then we're both going to add them to the list of students that we talk about every week. Because my office and the Dean of Students office has a list every week of students who we're concerned about, who we're trying to figure out how to get information about and how to help. And so if you've got, or one of us will reach out to you to either get more information or to help give you some thoughts about what to do on your end. So, don't ever hesitate to do that as well. Questions about any of that? But I would say, in doubt, don't hesitate to reach out. Don't hesitate to pop an email. I will pop my information real quick. Let's see if I can type and talk at the same time today. Probably not. Any questions here as we start to wrap up here? I wanted to leave a little time for that. Any questions or thoughts anybody has? No questions. I could not have done that well. Any questions or thoughts at all?
Actually, you did wonderful, I think.
Well, thank you.
Just the idea of the contact information, who can we get a hold of fast? Usually, yeah, we know we can call UP, but there are times that I will manage to get a student to the point of breathing and then putting them in my car and bringing them to counseling center.
Yeah, and know this, you can also call from your office, right? So feel free to call and say, listen, I have a student right here who's not doing well, who I need to get over. We have walk-in all the time. We're open from 8 to 4:30, and so even across lunch hour, it doesn't really matter. Somebody will be there to see a student if they need it. So that's always an option. We do. We even do residence life. We even are now doing some crisis response in the evening for students.
Yeah.
But for you all, don't ever hesitate. Sometimes it is helpful to walk them over, right? Or help get them to us. I think that one of the things that I would remember is this: we can't tell you if they came unless they sign a release, and often they'll tell you they did and they didn't. If you don't physically get them there, because they just get hesitant for whatever reason. So sometimes I've had lots of folks who will help them schedule their first appointment over the phone, because maybe they're not in crisis anymore, right? Maybe they don't need to walk over and talk to somebody immediately, but they do need seen. Sometimes I've had folks who just call from their office and will help put the student on the phone. So they've kind of been a part of that first process, which often will then help them follow through, in the aftermath. I've had folks who meet them there, sometimes because the person wants them to come in for a few minutes just to get comfortable. Sometimes just as a, hey, somebody cares enough about you to make sure you get here piece, right?
Yeah.
If that's doable for folks. But absolutely, we've had folks even walk people over, drive people over, and I think any way that, if you need help problem solving how to do that, then don't ever hesitate to call in a moment. And we're happy to help you. After 4:30, you kind of cross over into our on-call system, which is, and you don't get us directly anymore. What I will say is that most people still have access to the Dean of Students after 4:30, which like a lot of people do. So you can always access them as well, because they can access me and my after hours folks. We do not publish, I'll just be transparent, we don't publish the after hours on call number for my staff because it's not meant to be anytime a student needs to talk kind of line. And so we're just real careful with that line. That's when we need a student who needs screened or needs de-escalated, that we have now access to clinicians. But after 4:30, anybody can call the counseling center line and we'll get our community provider that we have, who is just somebody they can talk to, because they have that access 24/7. And then those folks, as they talk to them, get back to us and give us a report so we can follow up. We have a wonderful case manager, Shirley Retz, who anytime a call comes through after hours, then does a follow-up with them and helps make sure that they've gotten what they needed from that interaction and goes forward. So if you have, I know we're getting close to time, and you probably have other things set coming, but really just don't hesitate. And if in doubt, just throw a question my way, and I'm really happy to help problem solve what the best way is to come at that. Just know I've got 2 more things coming up too from through workshops. So we have one, I think the next one is on helping to try to eliminate the trauma narrative or the crisis narrative currently happening in mental health. We're going to talk more about that and why that's not helpful. And then I have another one coming up on talking about the impact of trauma and bias incidents on mental health and learning. And so, feel free to pop in on one of those if you feel so inclined, and really don't ever hesitate to reach out if you have a question or anything that I can do. So anybody have any final questions before we sign off? Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. You all have a
Bye.
great rest of your day and hope the start of your new year goes well.
Same
Take
to you.
care.
Recording. Thank you.
You have to
Thanks,
stop.
John. Was that okay?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Okay.
You have to
Yep.
stop
Oh,
recording.
I have to stop the recording.
Sorry.
Yes.
Okay.